to start this concept off, I wanted to bring up the idea of combining the Minecraft archaeology system together with the concept of the Iceologer, because of the similarities between the words Iceologer, Iceology, and archaeology. Now, I wanted to utilize this concept because I'd like to bring back an idea of mine known as the archaeology treasure glove. And I wanted to introduce the idea of this item having special attachments for the player to collect. So let's say that in this concept, the Iceologer has an interest in archaeology. And let's say that the Iceologer found the archaeology glove while exploring an archaeology excavation site. The Iceologer would then use its knowledge of Iceology to craft a new attachment for this glove item known as the Icicle attachment. This new attachment would allow the Iceologer to do a few unique moves. So this is how the ice attachment works. This net on the top of the glove is used to hold powder snow, and this item in the front of the glove is an icicle, just like the icicle hanging from the lantern on that light post. I also think that the idea of icicles forming on the bottom of blocks would be a really nice feature for these cold biomes. They would also make for good decorations. Now back to the icicle attachment. So the net is actually spring-loaded and meant to launch the powder snow. And the icicle is a kind of projectile that the Iceologer uses in combination with the powder snow to do a move known as the Icicle Super. What you're seeing here is actually similar to something that happens in real life known as supercooling. So I'm using the concept of supercooling and mixing in some of my own fantasy style into this idea. Basically, the Iceologer would try to hit the player with the powder snow, and if the hit was successful, a powder snow particle would follow the player. The Iceologer would then freeze the player with the icicle projectile, therefore stopping the player's mobility and dealing freezing hearts to the player. Perhaps it could take a few seconds before the player could move again. The Iceologer could even launch the powder snow into the air and freeze it to form the clouds of ice that fall down, just like we saw in the mob vote for the Iceologer. I also like the idea of the player being able to obtain the icicle attachment. I mean, imagine how useful this would be. That would be super cool. Also, don't forget to check out the mellow mode or dark mode version of this video if you want to see a new bonus concept. Now let's talk about another concept for the Iceologer. You might have noticed that the Iceologer's fist is actually frozen, and the Iceologer has actually done this purposely to perform a defensive move that will counter a player if they try to use arrows against the Iceologer, because I much prefer the idea of a mob being intelligent enough to counter a player that will try to defeat them from a safe distance, basically who is trying to bypass the unique moves of the Iceologer or any other mob. Now if you try to use arrows against this mob, the Iceologer will perform a move known as the Frozen Parry. So this is another move that utilizes the concept of supercooling, just like the Icicle Super move from the first part of this concept. Basically, once the Iceologer deflects the arrow with their frozen fist, frozen pieces of ice will break off around the arrow and encase it as a result of the sudden impact of the arrow and frozen fist. Some fantasy logic there too, but still a fun idea. The Iceologer will also deflect the frozen block back at the player, and if this block connects with the player, frozen hearts would be dealt to the player as another mechanic of this move. However, if you successfully dodge this block, it will land on the ground and it will shortly break. This block would also be known as the Frozen Brittle block. Now, if you quickly use a diamond pickaxe to mine this block before it breaks, you will obtain an item known as a Frozen Brittle chunk. So what is this new item? Well, in the first part of this concept, I spoke about the idea of icicles forming on the bottom of blocks in cold biomes only. However, if you are playing in a Minecraft world and finally found a cold biome, it's possible that this biome could be very far away from your base. So the player might not want to travel far distances to gather icicles for decoration and the icicle attachment. If this is the case, making a farm could also be difficult for icicles, as it seems that you would need to keep the chunks loaded that the farm is in. That way the icicles could update. So this is where the concept of the Frozen Brittle chunks would be very useful. If you manage to obtain 9 Frozen Brittle chunks, you could craft your own Frozen Brittle block that would basically be the source block for icicles in any biome that you take it to. I like this concept because of how you must obtain it, and it's almost like a bit of a game that you must play with the Iceologer so that you can collect the frozen chunks, making it a fun and rewarding design system for the Iceologer. Now, let's talk about a new mob concept that would be something like a companion to the Iceologer. And this companion mob is actually something that the Iceologer invented. But first, let me explain. Because the Iceologer is a mob that I've connected to the archaeology system, I wanted to connect my archaeology Oxwine bolt concept to the Iceologer. And the concept of the Oxwine bolt is that it is meant to be used in either wind-up type inventions or just inventions similar to the ones in my previous concepts. So the basic idea is, because the Iceologer is something of an inventor, the Iceologer would be quite interested in the technological properties of the Oxwine bolt once the Iceologer found one. Now, once the Iceologer found one, the Iceologer would then study the designs of the Oxwine bolt and replicate the Oxwine tech into more Oxwine parts. And then by doing this, the Iceologer would construct the Oxidol machine. Now, multiple of these oxidals would actually be buried in the snow around the Iceologer's base. And when the player is battling the Iceologer, there would be a chance that the Iceologer would signal one of these oxidal machines to join into the battle against the player. And the Iceologer would do this by using an invention known as the Oxowine Starter. So basically, the Oxowine Starter is an item that when struck against the ground, a spark will travel along the ground and will be drawn to the nearest oxidal. Once the spark connects with the oxidal's antenna, the machine will then start up and face the player alongside the Iceologer. I feel like the players can always have a companion, but I also like the idea of a hostile mob having a companion. And I also feel like this would put a unique spin on the concept of companions. Now, once the Iceologer jumpstarts the oxidal machine, this machine will then begin to chase after you while also trying to coat the player in powder snow, much like the Iceologer does with the icicle attachment. Now, this actually does a couple things to the player. This will actually slow down or dull how quickly the player is actually able to move around. And the Iceologer will then be able to more easily freeze you with the icicle super move because the player would already be coated in the powder snow. Now let's talk about another concept for the Iceologer. This is a move that would allow this inventive mob to move around more quickly, and this is a move that is known as Blizzard's Crystalline. So if the Iceologer is trapped or needs to quickly get away, this mob will use this move to do just that. So the Iceologer would first disappear into the Blizzard's Crystalline and reappear out of the snow. I like this idea because it just adds another layer of intelligence to this mob and would make it difficult and interesting to battle. Now let's say that you did defeat the Iceologer. Once defeated, the Iceologer will disappear one last time into the Blizzard's Crystalline. The player would then find one of two unique items. The first item that has a chance to be within the ice is actually the icicle attachment, as a reward for defeating the Iceologer. But the other item is actually guaranteed to be within the ice, and that item is known as the icicle key. And this key is actually an item that the Iceologer uses to open the barrel that's on top of this light post. I also wanted to say really quickly that I actually started selling merchandise. Shirts, bags, stickers, and more are available for you to purchase, with fun designs on them such as my Amethyst Shield, Oxwine Bolt, and Pincer Sword concepts. Also, the icicle key is a one-time use only item and will break after being used, as it is indeed made out of ice. However, the Iceologer was able to use it without it breaking because of this mob's experience and knowledge of the ice. But let's get back to the barrel. So this here is the concept of the ice-locked barrel. The Iceologer puts a block of ice on top of the lid and then melts the ice on top of it, therefore almost fusing the ice onto the barrel lid and locking the lid shut. And the mechanism on top of the ice is actually what you use the key for. Basically, the mechanism is another invention of the Iceologer, and if you try to break the ice or barrel before obtaining the icicle key, the mechanism will crush all of the items within the barrel. So no easy treasure for the player, you know what I mean? I quite like that idea because it would really feel like a reward for defeating the Iceologer. Now, what would you actually find in this barrel? Well, I'm thinking that you might find a few icicles, some powder snow, and perhaps some food. But the real treasure item that you would find in the barrel would be one of these three different items, all known as the Icicle and Oxowine study books. Each of these books would contain a unique crafting recipe of inventions designed by the Iceologer. These crafting recipe books would either be a recipe on how to craft either the ice-locked barrel, the Oxowine starter, or the oxidal machine. Three very useful items that would be really fun to obtain on top of all of the other fun items that you have the potential to find. Now, once you obtain one of these Icicle and Oxowine study books, you would only find the recipe books that you haven't learned yet in other ice-locked barrels. That way you don't continue to obtain the same recipe books again and again. I like this idea because I feel like it would be pretty cool to search for and collect all of these study books to craft all of these unique and fun items. I also don't think that the player should be able to craft these things unless it is learned by obtaining one of these study books. Some might disagree with that, but if you know my concepts, then you might also know that I quite like the idea of items needing to be found and earned. There's just something fun about exploration, or the sense of earning and discovering stuff, I guess.